Hello and welcome to another episode of EX Law with me, David Dungay. Today I'm delighted to welcome Phil Le-Brun, Executive in Residence at AWS and co-author of the Octopus Organization. Welcome, Phil, to the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good. Thank you for having me, David.
Great. So today, Phil, we're going to be talking a little bit about your book and some of the key sort of themes and concepts that come out of that. Today, everyone's going through an organizational change. We're trying to scale our businesses in a world of AI, and not all of these transformations are working. We're seeing gaps in executive leadership, in AI adoption, and it's interesting. Your book really addresses some of these sort of pain points organizations have today. But Phil, before we sort of dive into that conversation, do you want to give us a bit of an intro to yourself? What you do at Amazon, and maybe a bit about the book as well.
Sure. I have the privilege of leading a team in Amazon called Executives in Residence. We're all former practitioners, so typically CIOs, CTOs, senior leaders in large public sector and commercial organizations who've led large-scale change, often into the cloud with data, with AI. And our job is to help our customers, typically at the executive level, make their own mistakes, not someone else's, because boy, do we like to make the same mistake as everyone else. So that's the day job. We do that by engaging executives one-on-one, speaking events, writing, and the such like. Prior to this, I spent 31 years at McDonald's Corporation in various roles, used to be their International CIO, and then led their data development supply chain innovation team, where we did some incredible work over what was about 38,000 restaurants at the time with technology, which changed the McDonald's business. More recently, Jana Werner and I have written the book, The Octopus Organization with Harvard, and it came from frustration of our old jobs and our current jobs. We see the same mistakes being made time and time and time again in organizations that are trying to become a better version of themselves. And the book came out in December, and it's been really heartening to see the reception because people are looking for a different way of adapting, particularly with the demands of AI now.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's looking for those answers. They're not always readily available as well. So, well, let's dive into some questions then. I mean, the book it's really argues that these big bang transformations don't necessarily work. Like lighting 1,000 fires is perhaps better than lighting one fire in your organizations, but your CIOs, or CEOs even, are rewarded for those bold, those big bets. Those big things that make the headlines within that organization. So how do you sell this idea of continuous change to a board that wants like a really big transformation narrative?
Well, I think firstly, we have to acknowledge big bang transformations don't work. The data's been out there for decades. 70 to 90% of them don't see the benefits that were actually intended. And I think it's fundamentally wrong that we think we reward CEOs for making gambling bets. We're going to blow up the organization. Hopefully something a bit better will come out of it. Their job is to make bets on the future for their customers or citizens or patients or whoever they may be, not in terms of blowing up their organization. So big bets, thinking bold is really, really important. The problem is people conflate that with this idea that they have to do something drastic to their organization. And we know one of the worst ways of changing the ability of an organization to be more adaptable and resilient is to change the org chart, because the org chart is a hypothetical about how work gets done in an organization. It doesn't actually represent the reality of an organization. It's just typically a pretty PowerPoint. So people, I find, intuitively get this message that separating change and run, this idea that you go through 18 months of upheaval, soul-destroying upheaval, where your productivity actually drops, and then you go back to running your organization. It just makes no sense. This idea of being able to adapt your organization while also delivering results for the customers is more intuitive. This idea of every day you can get better, what in Amazon we call a day one culture, is actually pretty intuitive to most leaders. We just get trapped in the old ways of doing things because everyone else goes through big bang transformations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll come back to the day one culture in a moment, but you mentioned in the book that there's some big barriers to AI adoption right now. One of them is lack of imagination. Not necessarily the technology itself. What does that actually look like when you walk into a boardroom?
Yeah, I think it starts with these phrases that get thrown around. We were working with a luxury car manufacturer who declared they were going to be an AI first organization. No, you're not. You're a luxury car manufacturer. It's like saying I'm going to be an electricity first organization. It completely misses the point. So I think there's a degree of FOMO out there. And this is natural. There's this phenomenon called Martek's Law, which says the technology comes along, often takes off exponentially, but the people changes, things like skill sets and how work gets done is much more linear. So there's always typically this gap between what technology can do initially and what the organization's actually capable of. And what's really fascinating is almost every technology that's been introduced over the past couple of 100 years have affected the execution layer of the organization. So how can I manufacture faster? How can I minimize deviations and defects on the manufacturing line? AI inserts itself into the cognitive layer. So how do we make decisions as leaders differently? And that challenges our imagination. So the cost of execution is approaching zero. At home today, I can do pretty much anything with AI. The question is, how do I get out of the way of myself in an organization because it takes so long to make decisions? How do I fundamentally rethink business processes rather than thinking, as most enterprises do, how can I make my accounts payable process 10% more efficient? It's how can we get rid of it? How can we make it 20 times better? So it's that exponential thinking, which agentic and generative AI in particular now enable in organizations.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm seeing that imagination aspect. I'm seeing more and more business leaders making those decisions with AI and not necessarily with their teams as well. I think that's a problem we're going to see more and more,
Yes.
particularly with small businesses. And you get to see that confirmation bias and all of those things come through. But it's something that everyone's got to navigate, I guess. So. Let's go to the Tin Man metaphor as well. This is like a key metaphor in the book, and that is no heart, interchangeable parts, built for compliance. Um, do most organisations see themselves in that light, or does that really do they think that describes someone else right now?
Most leaders know this, and we tell a lot of stories in the book, and when we talk to customers, we don't go in and point out flaws of an organization because we don't work in that organization. Only the leaders, the people in that organization, really understand their own challenges. So we try and hold a mirror up. We use our past experiences, our learnings from other customers. And what we find is there's normally a lot of laughs around the C-suite table when we start to share some of the stories. Humor goes a long way. We tell one story in the book about 400 squirrels that were dropped into an industrial chicken shredder. A real story because someone was following a process. The process made no sense. It created outrage, but we followed the process. And you tell stories like that, and leaders do recognize their own organizations in that. Often, though, they think it's their organization that's at fault, not them. And what they need to understand is often it starts with leadership, it starts with clarity, it starts with this idea that they're architects of the system, that the organizational challenges come down to how have they created things like governance mechanisms, decision-making rights, how much agency do they give their people? Are they really clear what their organization stands for? And in most cases, the answers are not good in those organizations.
Yeah, that's it's really important to hold up that mirror. No organization is perfect by any means. And that reminded me, it's almost like the Ron Burgundy of processes. I'm following something, I know it's wrong, but I'm following the process, and the outcome might not be what my organization wants or needs. But
And it's safe,
let's
isn't it? I mean, we
yeah.
we we hold people accountable for following processes. We don't hold them so accountable for the outcome. And then we take all of those beautiful silos we have in an organization, divvy a project up. So IT do their job, marketing do their job, operations do their job. The outcome isn't good, but everyone's done their job.
So you identify 36 anti-patterns, you call them, which you feel are keeping organizations stuck. Sorry. We don't have time to go through all 36 right now, unfortunately. But if you had to pick one or two that you think is making AI dramatically worse rather than better, which ones would you choose?
Well, firstly, to contextualize it, when Diana and I sat down and started writing the book, we identified 300 dysfunctions of change, things which often derail change. We boiled those up into 36 anti-patterns, habitual conditioned responses like centralization, because it sounds efficient, even though it creates a bottleneck. And then those thematically, they fit into three themes: clarity, ownership, and curiosity. And a couple, AI makes a lot of them potentially more impactful in a negative way in an organization. For instance, we talk about gatekeepers versus guardrails. There's a story in the book about pigs and chickens. So pig and chicken walks down the road. Chicken says to pig, let's open a restaurant. Pig says to chicken, great, what are we going to sell? Chicken says to pig, ham and eggs, of course. And the pig stops and says, I'm a little bit more committed to this than you are. And the whole moral of the story is it's often hard to find people in organizations who have end-to-end accountability for value delivery, but we find lots and lots of people who can say no. Security sign-off, compliance sign-off, QA sign-off, finance sign-off, all of this. So we put all of these barriers in place. So if you believe that the cost of execution is dropping rapidly with AI, the biggest barrier to actually taking advantage of that is the fact we can do things in milliseconds, but decision making is still taking 3 months and is dependent on next Tuesday's governance meeting. So the same with dependencies. All of these, I can deliver something myself, except I need to talk to 50 people, and I need something from IT, something from marketing. All of those fly in the face of AI as an accelerator for delivering value in organizations. The other one, not to go through all 36, but the other one I'd call out is just simply if people aren't clear what an organization stands for, what great looks like, what the problems to solve are, and why they are important problems, then there's the real risk that people will use AI as a personal productivity tool, but it won't actually amount to anything organizationally because there's no alignment around what they're trying to achieve. We saw this during digital transformations. About 50% of digital transformations failed because everyone talked about digital transformations, but even at the C-suite, there wasn't clarity about what it actually meant for the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see that a lot as well with AI tools. A lot of people are making it, or using it to make their lives easier. But yeah, the value exchange with the business doesn't necessarily come through. I want to just pause there for a moment. There's a line in the book that does say, AI will make organizations, more like tin men, potentially, more automated, more optimized, or more controlled. But there's a bit of a juxtaposition there as well. Some of your argument seems to be sort of opposite to that as well. Can you maybe explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, we did some research in AWS last year, and what we found is most large enterprises are using AI to make themselves more efficient. So their decision making slow. Let's make the decision making a little bit less slow. We're doing tasks A, B, and C. How can we do A, B, and C a little bit faster or with less people? So we're optimizing as if we're a 19th century factory. So how can we produce 100 widgets, not 90 widgets? Versus what startups are doing, and some enterprises in pockets, which is saying, how can I use this technology to fundamentally deliver different or better value to customers, new services, new products, and the such like? So you can either take the race to the bottom philosophy, which is, I'm going to generate the same amount of functionality which no one uses with less developers, or I can use this to focus more of my people, time, and money on really understanding what the customer wants and delivering faster and better. I think we've seen this in companies that really do a good job with technology over the years. They often spend more on technology than their competitors because there's a direct line from how technology money is spent to the impact on the customer. I think we'll see the same with AI in organizations too, where you could actually see more people in an organization because they can deliver even more value to customers.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's just take a look back at, you had 31 years at McDonald's. That is a,
A
not maybe not,
lifetime?
yeah, is a good amount of time to get to know a business, that's for sure. But when you think about the kind of the millions of people that work in those restaurants, what does this distributed intelligence mean for them? Where is where AI can do most of that cognitive work. What does that mean for that kind of world?
McDonald's is a great example of, in some ways, the Octopus Organization. When we use the metaphor of an octopus, most organizations are biological, full of human beings. An octopus has 2/3 of its neurons in its arms, so it's actually decentralized. It's got that sort of overarching intent, but its arms can work independently. And it's curious, and it doesn't change. It's unlike most of our organizations, it hasn't changed its structure in over 250 million years. So if you look at McDonald's, there's I think 40,000-ish restaurants now. There is no way that every decision can go all the way up to the headquarters in Chicago and back down again. So the managers running those restaurants, the owner operators, franchisees running those restaurants have a lot of discretion. They need to make real-time decisions at the front line. But there's guardrails. I mean, you cook fries in a certain way, you run a restaurant in a certain way. All those things which are more about the sort of manufacturing of food are pretty standard. There's some variation. But when it comes to dealing with customers walking into the restaurants, all sorts of things can happen, all sorts of things can go wrong. And that's where you need that distributed intelligence. Now, will AI change restaurants? Yes, but I think for the better. If you look at the average restaurant, there is more work to be done than there are people to do it. So how can you use AI to help reduce the cognitive burden on a restaurant manager by saying, rather than saying you have to follow these 10 steps every day, regardless of what sort of restaurant you are, you take into account the context, your location, your volume, other factors, and say, hey, here's the next best action you could be taking as the manager of this restaurant.
Yeah, it sort of leads nicely into my next question. Leaders often talk about psychological safety and then ownership at the edges, which I guess kind of plays into that concept a little bit. But these managers obviously using AI to run their restaurants better. But AI can often surface some pretty uncomfortable truths as well around things, performance, around redundancy or decisions that have already been made. How can leaders really handle, and maybe not just McDonald's, but wider than that, but how should leaders handle that moment when AI tells them something they really don't want to hear?
We take some, I guess a couple of people we take some inspiration from here. Patrick Lencioni talks about leaders need to be hungry, humble, and smart. And the CEOs we interviewed while writing the book all were like that. If you bumped into them in the street, you wouldn't know they were running Ferrari or Pepsi or whoever. And why that's important, the hungry piece is about don't be satisfied with the status quo. But the humble is all about curiosity. You can't be a leader if you aren't curious. So if AI, for instance, surfaces something I'm uncomfortable with, my first reaction should be, what is it I'm missing? What context is this giving me? And also, importantly, is what I'm being told right? Because the danger with just the blind use of AI is if I and 10 competitors ask the same question of a large language model, we're going to get the same answer. Number one, is the answer right? Number two is this a race to the average? So as a leader, I've got an awful lot of discretion to say, look, this is what I'm being told, but what other context do I hear? What other data do I have? What anecdotes am I hearing from customers which may say this is right or this is wrong? And ultimately, as a leader, your job is to leave the organization in a better state than you found it. So leading beyond your tenure. So those leaders, hungry, humble, but also smart, so emotionally intelligent, able to bring people along on the journey.
Yeah. You mentioned it right at the beginning of the conversation. That was Amazon's day one culture, as your key sort of reference point. Never accepted that status quo, as you kind of just mentioned there. But Amazon is a pretty unique, singular, monolithic kind of beast of an organization. What do you say to that 500 person financial services firm who who's not Amazon, who's not such a big encompassing company?
That they're lucky that they probably don't. This people look at Amazon or look at large companies and say, you're lucky, you've got all this money and people and such like. Now, Amazon tries to run as the world's largest startup, so it's very decentralized. We run using this notion of two pizza teams that can be fed on two American-sized pizzas that are oriented towards a business outcome. So really, instead of believing that work gets done because of your organizational structures, all those beautiful silos you have, the reality is work gets done despite your organizational structure. So we deliberately bring together the right people to deliver on something. And they're small teams. Pretty much everything Amazon started off in one of those small teams. So what advice would I give to a 500-person organization is think in a similar way. How do I keep that startup mentality? How am I a bit scrappy? How am I going to be anti-bureaucratic? Bureaucracy allegedly grows 5 to 7% a year if you do nothing. It's like compound interest, except undesirable. As a leader, you need to be questioning all the time. Do I need to be in this decision? What's taking so long to make a decision? Why is a developer or a marketing analyst not able to take this decision, but it's being taken 2, 3, 4, 5 levels above them? How long is it taking from idea to getting things into the hands of the customers? Same questions an Amazon would ask, but I think in many cases, enterprise size is not a competitive advantage because you had one person setting up a project management office who then has 20% of their time with nothing to do. So they develop another process. That process subsumes even more of their time. So they hire another PMO and another one. Before you know it, you've put all this bureaucratic silt into an organization. And as leaders, we need to protect against that. We need to stop demanding just more and more process and really look at, are we delivering more and more outcome?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So Phil, before we leave today, let's maybe have a forward-looking kind of statement around, in 5 years' time. I mean, if we can predict in 5 years' time, everything's moving so quickly. But let's try and predict. In 5 years' time, when we look back on today, what's going to be the big leadership mistake from the AI era? What's it going to be? And have we even identified that, do you think?
Well, the biggest mistake clearly will be not reading our book. I think it's got all of the answers. No, seriously, I'm not a futurist. I don't believe in futurists. I do believe those organizations that really know why they exist, what we call our durable needs. So if you take Amazon as an e-commerce business, for instance, I'm not going to predict the future, but it's pretty fair to say, as a customer, I'll want bigger selection, lower prices, faster delivery. So the more you understand your customer and then appropriately apply the technology, the more successful you're going to be. So I think the companies that will fail will be the ones who continue to look inside themselves, who look at proxies instead of their actual customers, who treat AI as the outcome as opposed to the enabler of some really powerful outcomes. They're the ones that are going to struggle in the future.
Fantastic. And now for the most obvious question in the world. If people want to go and get hold of your book, where can they get it, Phil?
A few bookstores out there, including Amazon.com, or if you go to the octopusorganization.com, there's a list of retailers there as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for talking to me today, Phil. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and good luck on your future endeavors.
Thank you, David.
And thank you for watching me, David Dungay, on EX Law.